Clara had everything: money, power, and a family that seemed to love her. But something inside her felt wrong. Her husband, Daniel, was always too sweet, too careful. Her best friend, Lisa, was so good to her, always by her side, and her siblings? They all seemed to love her almost a little too much, although stubborn sometimes, but that's what siblings do, right? Clara loved them all. She never had a reason to doubt their love. Until one day, everything changed. She came home early and found something strange. A phone. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Daniel's. It wasn't any of the workers. As she picked it up, a message popped on the screen. "Hope you gave her the pill today." Clara's hands shook. What pill? Who was this message for? I'm the only she in this house. What could that mean? She showed the phone to Daniel. His face went pale. "I don't know whose phone that is," he said. "And I don't know what that message means." They called the domestic staffs, but they all denied owning the phone. Clara became worried. Is someone trying to hurt me? Maybe even kill me? But why? She asked herself. Clara had to find out. So, she made a plan, a dangerous one. She would fake her own death. She would watch them from the shadows. She would discover the truth. But what she found out was far worse than she ever imagined. Nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to discover. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from. And if you love this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Clara sat in her grand bedroom, staring at the mirror. Her heart pounded. Was she really going to do this? Dr. Lewis, her trusted physician, stood beside her. He held a small vial in his hand. "This will slow your heartbeat. It will make you look pale and lifeless," he explained. Clara took a deep breath. She had spent her whole life giving love and care to her family, her husband, her best friend. Clara had tried every option available for her to have children, but all attempt to get pregnant failed. She had made up her mind to will everything she owned to her family and loved ones except her mom, who left her and her siblings when she was 6. But before then, she needed to know the truth. "Who wants her dead?" "Do it," she whispered. Dr. Lewis injected the liquid into her arm. Almost immediately, she felt weak. Her eyelids grew heavy. Her body felt cold. "Lie back," the doctor instructed, arranging her on the bed. He placed ice packs near her skin to make her even colder. Then, he picked up his phone and made the call. It was time. Within the hour, the news spread like wildfire. "Mrs. Clara is dead." Her mansion filled with sobs. Servants cried. Neighbors gasped. Reporters rushed to cover the story. And then, one by one, her family began to arrive. Her husband, her siblings, her best friend, her father, her mother, her stepmother. They all walked in, their faces filled with grief. 'Neath her frozen skin, they all sobbed in agony. That evening, the grand living room of Clara's mansion filled with whispers and sobs. Her coffin, still open, lay in the center. A white sheet covered her cold body, and candles flickered around her. They all gathered, their eyes gleaming, eager to hear the will. Money, properties, beach houses, they were ready to take their share. But then, the lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. Silence filled the room. Clara's will was not what they expected. She had left specific instructions. Her will would only be read on the 10th day after her death, and her burial would take place on the 12th day. But there was more. Each of her loved ones would have to take turns mourning her, one person per day, for 10 days straight. Only after this would the real will be revealed. The room buzzed with whispers. Disappointed, confused, angry. "Why do we have to go through this?" someone muttered. "This is ridiculous," another scoffed. But they had no choice. If they wanted their share, they had to follow Clara's rules. On the first day, her husband, Daniel, arrived first. His eyes were red, his black suit perfectly ironed. He stood by her side, pressing a hand to his face as if in deep sorrow. Suddenly, behind him, Sally, Clara's best friend, entered. She wore a black dress, her makeup smudged with tears. Clara listened carefully, her body stiff. "Gone too soon," Daniel sighed, shaking his head. Sally sniffled. She was such a kind soul. Clara felt her heart melt. "I'm sorry I have to make you both go through this," Clara said in her mind. Then, Daniel did something strange. He reached for Sally's hand. Clara's frozen body tensed. Sally looked around, then squeezed his hand back. Daniel leaned in close, whispering, "Finally, we can have everything." Sally giggled softly. "I can't believe it. We don't have to wait anymore." Clara felt her heart shatter. She wanted to scream. She wanted to sit up and demand answers. But she couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she lay still, forcing herself to listen. Then Sally leaned closer to her face. "We were going to kill you anyway," she whispered. "But it looks like nature did the work for us." Claire's world went dark. Her husband, her best friend, they had betrayed her. But they had no idea she wasn't done yet. And they were about to regret everything. Claire's frozen body burned with rage. She wanted to scream, to jump up and grab them by their throats. But she couldn't. Not yet. She had to see it all. She had to know who else had betrayed her. Daniel and Sally stood over her, whispering, smiling. "How long do we have to keep up this act?" Sally murmured, adjusting her black dress. 10 days, Daniel said with a smirk. "Then the will is read, and we take everything." Sally chuckled. "I can't wait to get my hands on that beach house." Daniel kissed her forehead. "And I can't wait to finally be with you. No more sneaking around." Clara felt sick. The man she loved, the man she had trusted with everything, had been cheating on her. And her best friend? The woman she had shared her secrets with? She had been a snake all along. Then Sally sighed. "It's a shame, though. Clara was such a fool. Always so kind, so giving. If only she had been a little more selfish, maybe she wouldn't have ended up here." Daniel laughed. She never saw it coming. Clara clenched her fists under the silk sheet covering her. The pill. Was it them? What pill was it? Her mind racing. Oh, but she saw them now. And soon, they would see her. The first cut was made. The truth was no longer hidden. But how deep did the betrayal go? She would find out soon enough. The next day, Clara's siblings arrived. She had always taken care of them, made sure they never lacked anything. She thought they loved her for it. But as soon as they entered the room, the truth came out. Her brother, Ryan, walked in first, rubbing his hands together. "I called dibs on her luxury cars." Her sister, Lisa, scoffed. "Luxury cars? You can have them. I want her beach house. I've always loved that place." Ryan rolled his eyes. "You mean the house you only ever visited to throw parties?" Lisa smirked. "Exactly. What's the point of a house if not to have fun?" Clara's heart ached. She had spent years making sure they had everything they needed. She paid for Ryan's business. She funded Lisa's expensive lifestyle. And now, here they were, treating her like a treasure chest instead of a sister. Then, Ryan laughed. "Honestly, I don't even know why people liked her so much. She was never good at anything except making money." Lisa snorted. "Right? She was always so serious. No fun at all. If she wasn't our sister, I wouldn't have even talked to her." They both laughed, as if Clara's entire life had been nothing more than a joke. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. But most of all, she wanted revenge. If her husband and best friend were snakes, her siblings were vultures, circling her body, waiting to feast. But how many more were there? Who else had betrayed her? She would soon find out. On the third day, Clara's father arrived with his wife, her stepmother. Her father, Mr. Bennett, looked pale, his hands shaking as he stepped forward. He stared at her lifeless body, eyes filled with sorrow. "My firstborn, my little girl," he whispered. A tear slipped down his cheek. For a moment, Clara felt something stir in her chest. Could it be? Did he actually love her? But then, her stepmother placed a hand on his shoulder and leaned in close. "I know this is hard, darling," she said sweetly. "But think of the good in all this. We won't have to ask her for money anymore. Now it's all yours." Clara froze. Her stepmother continued, her voice barely a whisper. "She left you something in her will, didn't she?" "She had to. You're her father." Mr. Bennett sighed. I suppose." Her stepmother smiled. "Then we'll be fine." Clara waited, hoping, praying, that her father would be angry, that he would defend her. But instead, he just nodded. "You're right. I did everything for her growing up. It's only fair." Fair. Clara's heart shattered. Her father, the man she had admired as a child, was no different from the others. She had spent years trying to win his love, always believing she had to prove herself to him. But now she realized the truth. He didn't care about her. He only cared about what she could give him. Her own father. What else was waiting for her in the days to come? On the fourth day, Clara's mother arrived. Mrs. Lee walked into the dimly lit room, her steps slow, her face pale. Unlike the others, she didn't rush to claim anything. She didn't look around the grand mansion or eye the expensive furniture. She only saw her daughter. Tears filled her eyes as she moved closer to the casket. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against Clara's cold hand. My baby, she whispered, her voice breaking. Clara felt her chest tighten. Her mother fell to her knees, sobbing. I'm so sorry, my love. I never wanted to leave you. I fought so hard. I begged your father to let me see you, but he threatened me. He said he'd make sure you hated me. And he did. Her cries filled the room. I wanted to be there for you. Every birthday, every school play, every heartbreak. But I wasn't allowed. She buried her face in her hands. And now it's too late. Clara's breath hitched. She had spent her whole life believing her mother never loved her, that she had abandoned her without looking back. But now, was it all a lie? Had her father really kept them apart? Clara wanted to scream. She wanted to reach out and hold her mother, to tell her she was still here. But she couldn't. Not yet. She still had more to uncover. But one thing was certain, her mother had truly loved her. And for the first time since this all began, Clara felt a small piece of her broken heart start to heal. What other truths were waiting to be revealed? On the 5th day, Clara's house staff arrived. The people who had worked for her, her maids, her butler, her chef, her driver, stood in a line near her casket. Some wept quietly, while others whispered prayers. Unlike her so-called family, they were crying. They loved her, but they were mostly worried they are likely going to lose their jobs. Among them is Andrew, Clara's driver. He stood apart from the others. His face was pale, his eyes filled with sorrow. His hands clenched at his sides as if he was holding back a storm inside him. As the other workers left one by one, Andrew stayed. Then, when the last one was gone, he moved closer. Slowly, carefully, he bent over the casket, his fingers gripping the edge as he stared at her face. His shoulders shook, and then a tear fell. I'm sorry, Clara, he whispered. Clara felt her heart pound. Andrew's voice was broken. I should have told you. I should have warned you about them. Her breath caught. Warned her? About what? Andrew gritted his teeth. I saw things I should have spoken up about. He sobbed. Your husband. Your best friend. They weren't who you thought they were. His voice cracked. I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid. I thought you'd never believe me. Clara's chest tightened. Andrew knew. He had known all along. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, trembling with pain, he said, I love you, Clara. I always have. His breath hitched as tears spilled down his face. From the very first moment I saw you at that mall, I knew. I knew my heart belonged to you. His fingers tightened around the edge of the casket, his whole body shaking. I wanted to tell you. So many times. But how could I? His voice cracked. A man like me, loving a woman like you? A bitter chuckle escaped his lips. So I found another way. I gave up everything. Took a job as your driver. Just so I could be close to you. Just so I could see you every day. His chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. But now, his eyes shut tight, his hands trembling. Now it's too late. His tears dripped onto her still face. And for the first time in days, Clara wanted to cry too. But one thing was clear. Andrew was not like the others. He had loved her. And now, she had to find out the truth he had been too afraid to tell. What did Andrew know? And why had he been too scared to speak? I hope wherever you are, you find peace, Clara. Then he left. Clara lay still, her mind racing. On the 10th day, they all arrived dressed in black, their faces painted with false grief. Inside Clara's grand mansion, they sat, murmuring in low voices, pretending to mourn. But deep down, they were waiting for her will to be read, for her wealth to be divided. Then, the lawyer walked in. A heavy silence filled the room as he placed his files on the table and pulled out a small flash drive. Before we proceed, he said, his voice firm, Mrs. Clara has one final request. You all must watch this first. He walked to the massive TV on the wall and inserted the drive. The screen flickered to life. And then, chaos. The first clip played. Clara's husband, her best friend, holding hands, laughing, walking into a hotel together. Gasps filled the room. Faces turned pale. Her husband lunged at the lawyer. Turn it off, he shouted, panic in his eyes. But the lawyer stepped back. This was Clara's wish, and we will watch it to the end. Everyone fell silent as more clips played. Secret meetings, whispered conversations, stolen kisses. The betrayal was undeniable. By the time the screen faded to black, no one could look at each other. Then, the words "my will" appeared on the screen. And there she was. Clara, alive, looking breathtaking, confident, unshaken. Now that I have seen how much you all truly loved me, she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Here is my will. She turned to the camera, her expression turning cold. My dear ex-husband and childhood best friend, the two people I loved most in this world, from this moment on, you will be stripped of everything I have ever given you. Gasps. Divorce papers have been sent. You will walk away with nothing. Her husband's face drained of color. Lisa clutched her chest. To my siblings, $500,000 each. Take it and never come near me or anything that belongs to me again. To my father and his new family, I give you $1 million. Not out of love, but so that my hatred for you does not extend to your innocent children. After today, we are strangers. Tears welled in her father's eyes. Then, Clara's voice softened. To my mother, I am sorry. Sorry for shutting you out all these years. From today, I promise to make up for lost time. A sob broke from her mother's lips. And then, Clara smiled. And now, to Khalid. I turned to the screen. Khalid's hands trembled. My dearest Khalid, I have loved you from the moment you walked into my life as my driver. But believing I was married to a loyal man, I buried those feelings. I regret that now. A deep breath. So today, in front of everyone, I ask you, be mine. Let's build a life together. If you say yes, I will be the luckiest woman alive. Silence. Then, the doors swung open, and there she stood. Clara. Alive. Glowing. Gasps filled the room. Some clutched their chests. Others staggered back in shock. Khalid's breath caught in his throat. She was real. Then, without hesitation, he ran to her, pulling her into his arms. Her mother followed, sobbing, holding her tight. The rest? They sat frozen, their sins exposed, their futures shattered. Clara had won, and this was only the beginning. Just as the shock settled in the room, a loud knock thundered against the mansion's grand doors. Before anyone could react, the police stormed in. Daniel Williams and Lisa Roberts, the officer in charge, announced, his voice echoing in the tense silence. You are both under arrest for the attempted murder of Mrs. Clara Williams. Gasps filled the room. Daniel's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Lisa's hands trembled as she clutched her dress. This is ridiculous. Daniel barked. Clara is standing right there, alive. How can you arrest me for murder? Lisa nodded quickly. We love Clara. We would never hurt her. But the officers didn't waver. Two men stepped forward, grabbing them by the wrists, locking cold metal handcuffs around them. As they dragged them away, Daniel thrashed, his face twisting in desperation. Clara, tell them. You know I loved you. Clara took a slow step forward, her eyes burning with fury. Love me? She scoffed. You drugged me, Daniel. You fed me pills every day, and for what? To kill me slowly. Lisa burst into tears. No, it wasn't poison. We swear. The room fell silent. Clara narrowed her eyes. Then what was it? The officers exchanged glances. One of them pulled out a small evidence bag containing tiny white pills. Lisa sobbed harder, her knees giving out. Daniel clenched his jaw. Speak now, the officer ordered, or we'll make you talk. Daniel hesitated. But then, the interrogation began. Hours passed. Torture. Questions. More pressure. Until finally, Daniel cracked. It wasn't poison. His voice was barely above a whisper. It was birth control. Silence. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. What? Lisa, shaking, nodded. We needed to make sure you never had a child, Clara. If you had a baby, your wealth would go to them, not us. Daniel's face was pale. He swallowed hard. We planned to get rid of you eventually, but first, we needed control over everything you owned. Clara's breath hitched. Her hands curled into fists. So you spent years drugging me? Her voice was sharp, full of unfiltered rage. Making sure I could never have a family? All while waiting to take everything that was mine. Daniel refused to look at her. Lisa broke down completely. I didn't want to, but Daniel said. Shut up, Lisa. Daniel snapped. The officers didn't wait for more. They shoved them both into the police van, slamming the doors shut. Clara stood there, watching as they were driven away. Two people she once loved, now nothing but strangers. Her hands trembled, but suddenly a warm touch. Khalid. He stood beside her, his fingers wrapping gently around hers. You're free now, he whispered. Clara took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt it. Freedom.